Hello and welcome to an episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
Hi, I'm Larry.
I'm Ari.
I'm Ali.
And I'm Josh.
And
Ali, welcome back to the panel.
Thank you.
You enjoyed the JFK discussion that we had?
Yeah, I think I did. Yeah.
And Ari, welcome back. And today we're going to be talking about another president, and we're going to be doing something that we have never done before on Literary Gladiators. We are going to be examining an inaugural address from William Henry Harrison. For those of you that do not know, William Henry Harrison was a president. He was our 9th president. He had the longest inaugural address at 8,445 words, and he had the shortest tenure. 31 days.
It was
How many words?
8,445. I think it was about an hour and 45 minutes.
Yes,
Josh is a sadist.
Whoa. Can I make a remix out of that? Like, I just want to make a remix out of that statement.
In the words of Jesi,
Josh is
elaborate.
Josh is a sadist.
Why did you make us read this?
Why did I make you?
Is it punishment? Do you view it as punishment?
I thought it was.
Crime and punishment.
I thought it was different.
Oh,
Punishment
didn't
and
say
crime.
that again.
In the hall.
We're not rating this though either, because we don't rate documents.
Okay,
But
I give it 0 stars.
the discussion starter for this one is. At 8,445 words, William Henry Harrison's inaugural address was longer than any other president, and at 31 days, his tenure was shorter than any other president. What kind of tenure would you have expected from Harrison based on his address?
A normal one.
Yeah, pretty.
For the time, anyway.
A verbose one?
Plus it would have changed.
Which would have been below mediocre.
Yeah, I'd say below mediocre.
I would have said that it probably would have changed several things, not necessarily for the better.
I don't know about that because William Henry Harrison, in addition to reading this, I also read this biography by Gail Collins. My source for the inaugural address was Ayn Randall Strock's collection of all of the speeches. And I also read
All of his speeches?
He has all of the presidential inaugural speeches, up to Obama.
U.S. Presidents for Dummies.
U.S. Presidents for Dummies and the Complete Book of U.S. Presidents, 8th edition, William A. Di Gregorio, with updates by Sandra Lee Stewart.
Oh, darn, it should have been the 9th edition.
But, back to what I was saying about Harrison, the reason that I would say that it was, during his very short term, the only thing that happened, aside from the fact that he went to the market to get vegetables and to the bookstore to buy a Bible, is that he was being pummeled by job seekers. They were sending in notes and resumes, looking to get a position in Harrison's cabinet and during his administration, and he was being bogged down by them. He was constantly being exhausted to the point that William Henry Harrison was only looking to serve one term, and he was a candidate. He wasn't one of the more qualified candidates.
He was also older. I thought I read in the first line of the inaugural address that he had retired and then came back to become president. Or something like that.
He had retired from whatever his job was, I guess.
Yeah, it was kind of like called from a retirement, which I had supposed was to continue from the residue of my life to fill the chief executive office of this great and free nation.
I came out of retirement to run for president.
It was similar to George Washington. George Washington was looking to leave public service, but he came back in order to serve the country as its president. Because the presidency was seen a bit differently, it was more of something that it was a call to duty that you would step up and serve. William Henry Harrison was a military general. He was known for the Battle of Thames. The one that we know him for most is the Battle of Tippecanoe, because that's what they used as his campaign slogan. But he was also he was also the governor of the Northwestern Territory in between military operations. He was a representative. He was a senator. He ran for president in 1836. He was sharing the Whig ticket. The party decided they would run 3 candidates, and Martin Van Buren was able to slide right in as the Democrat.
Yeah, he won that one.
But when they decided, in 1840, it looked like the 3, probably the more active and more powerhouse candidates would have been Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and or Winfield Scott. Scott was also a general. But William Henry Harrison was their compromise candidate and the one that had done his service and was the polished veteran. And
obviously he had a lot more experience because he was older.
Yes,
I would
because
think so.
he was also he was an ambassador to Colombia too, which the
country Colombia.
Yeah, the country in South America.
Yeah.
The thing about William Henry Harrison, though, is that in each of these positions, he was okay. Yeah, I think there were moments where he meant well.
I do want to point out that it doesn't even have to do with presidency, but like just because you do poorly or okay or good in one thing doesn't mean that in something else you would have also done poorly or okay or good.
I think that you do have a point, but I don't think he would have done that well in the presidency.
No, and I don't think he would have either. I think he would have just been mediocre at best.
Yeah. And the 1840 campaign, that's the birth of the modern day election. They spun so much information about him, making him the valiant hero of Tippecanoe, and then when Tyler joined the ticket, Tippecanoe and Tyler too, because the big name Whigs of the time didn't want to be the second man.
I always think, and this isn't always accurate, but this is just what I generally tend to think, the more military / business / general hype that you hear about a president before an election, the less likely I'm going to vote or that I would have voted for them. Mm-hmm. It feels like a lot of times like the candidates, the people who run, who just get down to business and do what they have to do instead of people hyping them up, usually do better because they're doing what they need to do rather than be like, hey everybody, I'm William Henry Harrison and I'm not from Hamilton and I'm going to be a great president because I was from Timbuktu or whatever.
It was even he was
That would
pumped
have been
up
a better
with,
address.
He was pumped up with the whole the log cabin and hard cider campaign. They portrayed him as a common man from the log cabins, and Martin Van Buren was the elitist, when in actuality William Henry Harrison was from a more elite background. His father was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he's got a very strong lineage. Martin Van Buren was from a more modest background. He was from New York. He was Dutch heritage.
And did you think Martin Van Buren was good or not good?
Not. He was from that same. Anybody with the exception of Polk, anybody between Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln was mediocre at best. And Andrew Jackson, I personally argue, I wasn't a fan of his. But Martin Van Buren was.
I think there are some presidents, obviously, that people cannot be a fan of, but you have to argue they've made some sort of stamp on history, whether it be positive or
You
negative.
have that, but it all depends on where your positions stand. But was there anything that stuck out to you in this address?
No.
Yes.
Oh, you go first then.
It's very wordy.
I think
Could have probably got the same message across in 1/4 of the time. But he's got to use every $20 word he knows.
William Henry Harrison, I feel that he did that because he wanted to make himself capable. He wanted to show that even at the age of 68, he could deliver an almost 2-hour speech in the rain without a coat, hat, and scarf. And be able to show that
All he needed was the deal with its sunglasses.
But as far as
I feel bad for the
but I
guy.
also feel that I think that in
Imagine
a way,
having to sit there and listen to that in the rain for 2 hours.
Yeah,
in a way, I think that what he had to say, not necessarily what he had to say was orchestrated. It was almost as if somebody was pumping him up.
Yeah. Well, like I kind of what you're saying. Like I kind of disagree that he should have gone that long, and puffed up. I mean, it could be a little bit of cockiness as well. It's just like, are you really that significant? Rather than just do your job. I think it could have been a little bit more than rather than just making a long speech, unnecessary speech in the cold rain, and
In the address, he was pretty much saying that he knew all these things about the government. And
we don't even know if all of them were true or not.
That's my point.
It was positions that he took, and I almost feel that he got some. I think the Whig Party really
again kind of
helped it
drives home the point I was trying to make earlier, and that Larry was saying that I don't think he would have been the best president because you can kind of see the personality coming out of that speech. The length, the wording, the timing, just everything was off. And then to segue a little bit here, of course, you've got the fact that he's in 45-degree weather and he's sitting out there. I think it was raining as well. And he's just sitting there giving the speech for an hour and 45 minutes. And a lot of people, it might not have been the case because I've heard both. I've heard typhoid fever and I've also heard pneumonia. But we don't know, but that could have been...
His was primarily pneumonia.
Right.
It became a legend that that's what killed him.
Yeah. It was the fact that he was out there for such a long time.
Without a hat, without a coat.
There was that, and then there was the fact that he did the same thing. He would do his own errands and caught a cold that way. And the practices, too, the way that they intentionally caused him to form blisters and bleed.
What?
That was a,
Wait, what?
That was a motive to... it's a motive in this book. At the very... I'll quote it for you.
What, his treatment, you mean?
Yeah, it was part of the treatment. It was...
Was it popping blisters or something?
It was... he was, as per page 123 of Gail Collins' biography, he was then given the most thorough medical care available, which included bleeding and cupping, in which a hot cup was placed against the skin, creating blisters. There was also a regimen of pills, including laudanum, opium, castor oil, and camphor, along with wine and brandy.
Yeesh.
Well, then again, I can imagine him.
That was the...
I can imagine him like taking the oath. He's like, place your right hand. Oh my God! What's happened to his hand?
That was not what happened.
How do you know, Josh? You weren't there.
He wasn't...
What, do you count on the newspaper to tell you the truth?
He didn't have the pneumonia. I'm pretty sure he developed the illness after the address.
Oh.
That's what they want you to think.
But it's interesting. The Marcus Stadelman, he wrote U.S. Presidents for Dummies. It was interesting. He submitted the fact that he felt that William Henry Harrison was one of our worst presidents, and I can't help but go back to his why.
Did he say that in that? Yes, he is one of our worst presidents, or he could have been one of our worst presidents.
He has
How did he
him.
word it?
He has him on the list of 10 worst presidents, and here's why.
Okay.
And I quote, "It is not fair to judge William Henry Harrison on his term in office. He served only a little over a month, most of it on his deathbed. It is justified, however, to rank him on his campaign and his agenda. Well, there was no agenda, because Harrison stood for nothing and ran without a platform. His campaign portrayed him as a hard-drinking man of the people who was born in a log cabin. He did drink hard cider, but he grew up wealthy on a large estate in Virginia. His campaign was based on a lie, but it got him elected."
That's interesting. You see,
Sounds familiar too.
now maybe that's part of the reason why he gave this address is because of the fact that he had no platform. Because he's not talking about anything, really. He's just going on and on and on.
I think if there was one thing that stuck out to me, it was at the end where he said that we need to be careful with the party system. Otherwise, the party system is going to consume us and consume the country and destroy its infrastructure.
I think it's fair to say that when it comes to presidents, it doesn't even have to be a U.S. president. It could be like a student council president or whatever reason you want to use. Lying is very much a way to kind of, I guess it's kind of like a way to influence people. Like, this is what I'm going to do when I get elected, and then you either don't do it when you get elected, or you weren't even planning on doing it at all. So, is it a fair point? My question to everyone here is it a fair point that if he was lying about stuff before he was elected, does that really make him any different than other presidents? It's what you do after you're elected that's most important.
It is the birth of, that's why they say it is the birth of the modern campaign. But I think that historian, between Standelman, Gail Collins, and the information that I've gathered, while it may not be fair to only judge him by his campaign, even though it is a campaign that has shaped the way that future campaigns be operated, William Henry Harrison was not setting himself up for anything spectacular.
Do you think he just would have been, like, I guess the best word would have been a filler president had he survived?
You could say that, but there's the whole idea of, do you run the country or does the country run you? And his administration would have ran him into the ground. And I think it pretty much did very quickly.
So he wouldn't have really done much. He just would have been like a person just standing there and everyone's going to be like, do this, do this, do that.
Pretty much. He would have exhausted him. John Tyler was the one that succeeded him, and I think he would have been able to keep his cabinet because John Tyler, everybody except the Secretary of State left. And his own party wouldn't even re-elect him, to the point that in 1844, John Tyler was actually endorsing the Democrat, and he was a Whig.
How about that?
And it was and 1844 was about the annexation of Texas. So
was he for it or against it?
John Tyler was for it. Polk was for it. Henry Clay and most of the Whigs were against it.
I see.
So there wasn't really much. I know that with William Henry Harrison, he always voted in support of abolition. No, or he always voted in support of slavery, the rights for owners to own slaves. But he himself he treated them more as servants, where he would have them serve for maybe 10 years or 12 years, and then he would release them. He'd give them 3 suits and a Bible and let them on their way.
I have one more thought. Do you guys think that it actually was the weather and the day of the speech that killed him? Or do you think it could have possibly have been the exhaustion he felt from everyone grinding him into the ground? Or do you think other?
Both.
I say the speech because it's that bad.
Yeah. How about you, Allie?
I wouldn't say, the speech probably could have been trimmed down. I mean, anything like with like I said, anything with the sleeveless shirt just in the rain, it's just kind of redundant, and it just kind of comes off, it could come off as arrogance rather than...
I think it was, but I think that, and I also think that the practices, I think that the cupping was just...
Maybe...
bleeding and cupping was...
If he was more humble, probably it would have been better,
I think another thing that points to the arrogance is the campaign that he ran. I think being, instead of putting together a policy platform, instead you try to undermine people's intelligence by manipulating them. I think that's also a sign of arrogance.
In a way, and funny enough, he really wasn't that. He was more of a. He was actually a modest person.
Maybe it was the
Politics
administration.
is.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it had to do with the Whig Party because Henry Clay was he was an aggressive politician. And he was more of the driving force behind that party.
Maybe William Henry Harrison was that guy, Hitchhiker's Guide, where he reads the poetry and someone gnawed their leg off because it was too boring and long and bad. That's what he is.
That's just, when did the Democrat Party start?
Andrew Jackson was their first
Okay.
president. I want to say that, yeah, he won in 1828.
Because there was another party before the Democrats, right?
It was the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans.
Right.
Yeah. You know what probably was to lead on to the follower idea? That he could have potentially be a follower is also because, like, with that Whig Party making him do that long speech, and it could have been like with the him going to medical school, the idea of him going to medical school, he never exactly wanted it, but his parents kind of pushed him into it, and it's just, he never really, and
there was a mix of things.
He never really wanted it, and it's just like, he just did it to please his parents, like he was trying to please the Whig. So maybe it wasn't all arrogance in some aspects.
Yeah.
It could have been.
I think it was just.
He was not a leader, just a follower.
I think he had a lot to demonstrate as well, because he was at that time. He was 68 years old. At the time, he was the oldest person to assume the presidency.
Until Reagan.
Reagan broke the record at 69, and then Trump broke the record at 70.
How about that?
But do we have any final thoughts?
Don't read it.
Am I alive? It was a very long speech. Even reading it really fast, it took a good 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and it kind of is very repetitive and dull.
It was dense. It was pretty much just him listing the different factions of government.
Yeah, and no speech should ever just be listing things.
And
that's what a list is for.
How about you, Allie?
Yeah, no, I kind of was a little. I was a little fascinated by when we were gonna pick this topic, but it was really, I feel like the whole thing was like what you were saying. It was kind of redundant. The whole aspect of the speech and everything. I don't know. I read it through kids' books and stuff. It was just, there was just some interesting facts about him, not as a president, but just in general,
This might be the first time that I've ever read anything and then also pre-read it so I could research stuff, and that the research was actually more interesting than the background.
Oh, yeah. I read this book, and then I read two other books. I read 3 books about William Henry Harrison to prepare for a discussion about his inaugural address. Before we wrap up, I have a trivia question for all of you. William Henry Harrison was one of 4 presidents that did not get to appoint a Supreme Court did not get to appoint a justice to the Supreme Court. Who were the other 3? Larry, do you want to be the first to?
I'm gonna shoot out a guess for one of them.
Which 3? Yeah.
I guess John Adams would be one. That would be my
the other
guess.
2?
No.
Which John Adams?
The first one, 'cause Washington would have just filled it.
Okay.
All right. Who are your 3?
Oh, I mean, not knowing so much about presidential history before 1900, if all the answers are before 1900, I abstain from the question.
Allie.
Okay, I'm sorry. It was like, who would have...
Who were aside from William Henry Harrison, which other presidents did not appoint any justices to the Supreme Court?
Not any justices to the Supreme Court. I'm gonna... Yeah, this is a really long stretch, but it could be maybe Andrew Jackson, John...
Well, James Garfield wouldn't he? Because he was killed.
Andrew Jackson.
No, not you. I'm talking to him.
And then
I'm gonna get everybody's answers
I'm
first.
gonna do.
So
Oh,
that'll
crap.
actually be one of my answers.
That's probably the next one that would probably be on the list. Millard Fillmore.
So yours is Millard Fillmore, John Adams, and Andrew Jackson.
I'm going. Yeah, I'm
And
going with a safeguard with
is
him.
James Garfield.
The only one I could think of is James Garfield because he also was not alive for very long.
Okay.
I'm taking Cleveland.
Cleveland was around. For
I'm
a long
gonna
time.
say the answer because none of you named any of them. The three, aside from William Henry Harrison, the other three presidents to not appoint any justices to the Supreme Court: Zachary Taylor, Andrew Johnson, and Jimmy Carter.
I
Andrew
could have guessed
Johnson?
Jimmy Carter.
Oh, you said.
James Garfield actually appointed one justice to the Supreme Court, even though he was only.
Oh, I should have realized Andrew Johnson. I remember he's like
He
the
was,
worst president ever.
James Garfield
I had to-
yeah,
None
he
of
was
you have
only
named any.
able to really operate for 4 months of his 6 months. 6 months that he was there. but-
Johnson. I'm the worst president ever,
and
I didn't elect anyone to the Supreme Court.
But
Pretty good.
the sources that I used to prepare for this discussion, in addition to the complete book of presidential, I also referred to.
He's a president.
I
He's the
referred.
worst
He
president.
succeeded Lincoln.
Yeah.
I referred to the biography by Gail Collins, U.S. Presidents for Dummies, and the complete book of U.S. Presidents, 8th edition by William A. D. Gregorio. Anybody else had any references?
Andrew John. Oh yeah. I was gonna say that I looked up a website that has all the inaugural addresses all in one site. It was like presidents. It was like a presidents. You can find it on Google if you just look up.
Let me know, and I'll leave it down in the description.
But I know that it was like presidents was the name of the site.
Already
I just
then.
don't remember the whole URL.
Already then. Be sure to join us next time for another episode of Tori Gladiators. For now, keep reading.
Andrew Johnson stinks.
Hooray!